right, welcome to Reptile Fight Club. Tonight we've got a great guest lined up, Dr. Andrew Holycross. We're going to be talking about some of his work with rattlesnakes and perhaps some other wildlife, and I'm really happy to have him here. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for making the time for us. We're really excited to chat with you. Yeah.
Sorry I missed it last time.
No, all good. Yeah,
it's the way it goes.
Research, right? Yeah, and then ran out of gas, right? So no worries.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess, just as sort of a natural starting point, do you want to give us some of the audience, some of your background, talk about your books, what you're doing now?
Oh, how far back do you want to go? It's been 60 years. So.
Yeah, I mean, whatever's worth telling, right? So.
I think my first interest in herpetology, like so many of us, I was a kid, and I lived in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and there were tiger salamanders that would fall into our window wells, and so my dad helped me build a giant terrarium, and we had like 20 tiger salamanders in there. I traded a horned lizard for a garter snake with a neighborhood kid, and that garter snake. His name was Sir Hiss. And he was my pet for 6 years, made it through a military move and finally died one day. And I was a young fellow, so that was a pretty sad occasion.
Yeah.
But those were the early days. I was just always interested in amphibians and reptiles and biology. My mom about 10 years ago, sent me a box of books from my childhood. And it was like everything in there was a field guide, animals this, animals that, in a running brook, all these, books about critters and how to find them and things like that. So it started young, went to college and thought I'd be a war correspondent or something like that. I don't know. And then I took a biology course my second semester and I was like, oh yeah, I remember. And that was it. I was in. And then got a master's studying prairie rattlesnakes in the Sandhills of Nebraska, which was really fun.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And in a prairie dog town, so burrowing owls, long-billed curlews were my neighbors. Right. Prairie dogs kind of got used to me, not quite entirely. And
kiddish little things.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they don't like neighbors. They don't like big neighbors.
Right. Yeah.
So then I went down to ASU and worked on a PhD for 11 years.
Okay.
And finally, they asked me to leave and graduate.
Yeah. It's interesting how I got a PhD in virology and, it was like kind of the 5 years in and out and, maybe 5.5 years. Some of my projects didn't start out very well, and then, I'd see my friends in the biology department and they're 6, 7, 8 years, and you're just like, oh man, I guess you're limited to maybe your field time and that might impact how long it takes. But
well, all that's true. And then ignoring other people's advice is what got me where I was. They're like, you're going to study not just a snake, but an endangered rattlesnake, right? It's like, you must really want to stay here a long time. I had buddies that came in and, Drosophila lab, and they were out in 2.5 years. So I have no regrets, none.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So, what was kind of the focus of your PhD work?
So the PhD was just doing comparative conservation biology of 2 rattlesnakes, and one was the desert Massasauga, which I studied down south of Portal in the San Bernardino, San Simon Valley interface right there. Yeah. And then I studied Obscurus for the dissertation as well. New Mexico ridge-nosed rattlesnake. And mainly in the Animus, but also in the Palencios and a little bit in the San Luis, a little bit of field work in the San Luis, mostly down there just to get genetic samples for the genetic chapter of the dissertation.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah, that's that was kind of my thinking. Like, I really wanted to be a herpetologist my whole life. That's what I'd tell everybody I was going to do. And then when it came time, my wife's like, "How many jobs are out there for, what kind of salary does a herpetologist?" I'm like, "Oh, I never thought about that." So, and I had an uncle that was a virologist, and he's like, "Oh, you ought to come check out the lab." I'm like, "Hey, I can do herpetology in my spare time, and just kind of enjoy it rather than have it be a job." So,
like Lawrence Flower did.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if that was the best choice, because I sure spend a lot of time thinking about herps.
Yeah.
But that's cool. So I'll live vicariously through you, I guess.
Yeah, as long as you don't have to have my bank account from 20 years of academia, right? It's not very big.
My wife is wise.
Yeah, she is wise.
Yeah. Not that any research professors make all that much. So but it is a kind of a labor of love, I guess. And the
Absolutely.
biological sciences are fascinating, and all sorts of interesting things. So I don't regret my decision.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I'm glad I transitioned out when I did, but
Right.
But yeah, it was an amazing run. 11 years working on a PhD. I have no regrets about that. It was, I was bringing in plenty of funding, and, more than probably a third of the faculty at that time.
Oh,
and
wow.
so there wasn't a big push to kick me out, but eventually they want you to fledge.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like they want to be promoted, and they need grad students who have finished to help them out there. So they're like, "Come on, let's get you out of here." Yeah. That's the way it goes in academia sometimes. Yeah. But yeah, that's really fascinating research for sure. And that's the kind of stuff I'm really jealous of. I would have loved to have done, field work and things like that. That was another question my wife had, is like, how long, how much will you be gone if you're a biologist? I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, a lot, depending on the nature of your question. I was lucky that, I had a pretty good balance of field work and lab work, so it, a rare rattlesnake, you're spending a lot of time on logistics, getting teams together, because, you're not going to do it on your own, and putting the time in the field to get the animals. And, but, then you get your samples, and wintertime comes, and you're home and you're doing genetic analyses, or you're, picking through snake poop, trying to identify remains. What I focused on in that dissertation was diet, reproduction, and conservation genetics for those two species. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Cool work.
Good old, the natural history is the fun stuff. That's the stuff I love,
Yeah.
Natural history, life history, that's where it's at for me.
Exactly. That's the stuff, the papers I like to read are the natural history stuff. Yeah.
It ain't a what?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So learning about some of these small montane rattlesnakes and their dietary preference for centipedes and things, and then seeing some of those centipedes, you're like, oh man, that is a crazy deal. Yeah.
The centipede thing, we documented that. We did a paper on rock rattlesnakes. We encountered a lot of snakes in our studies. We didn't just look at Obscurus. I mean, if we caught a lepidus, we brought it in, we weighed it, we measured it, we tried to squeeze a fecal from it, got a blood sample, et cetera. So we ended up doing diet studies on lepidus and willardi and Massasauga, all three. And centipedes were present in all of them. And that's the first time that anybody had documented, a large proportion of centipedes, by item analysis, not by mass or anything, in rattlesnakes. Certainly, there had been previous observations of them eating them, but the importance of the centipedes in their diet just really, that was the first time that came to light. Right. So it was surprising. You're going through museum specimens and opening them. So, whoa, my God, look at the size of that. It's longer than the snake, We had once we found that, even before the papers were published, we had some captive Massasaugas, and we ended up throwing some centipedes in with them, and just watching the behavior. And it was interesting. They'd kind of get up and away from that prey item, like they'd raise the front third of their body up and they're like focused in on it, and then they'd strike it and back up really quick, and then after it was dead, they'd come in and eat it. And we also found a lepidus dead on Animas Mountain that had tear in its neck, and brought it back to the tent, which was our lab, and it was an Army GP small. And I pried that little tear open, and inside was the I'm gonna forget the word, like chelicera from that. From a centipede. So there's one that, and we've seen a couple observations. It's in the book, Snakes of Arizona and the Lepidus.
Right. Yeah.
There's a couple observations now. They don't always win that battle.
Right. Yeah. That's could go either way with some of those things.
It's a dangerous prey item,
for sure.
Little snake. So
yeah. And is it primarily the juveniles, or the adults taking these as well? Is it kind of a shift away from those as they mature?
Yeah, it depends on the species, but with willardi and this is across both willardi and obscurus, it's the juveniles. The juveniles are eating mostly centipedes and lizards up until about 400 millimeters snout vent length, which is the length at which they approximately attain reproductive maturity. So, I think it's just a, gape limited predator, right? What's available, what they can forage on, where they are in the habitat. It may be just, they're gape limited and that's what they encounter most. I don't know.
Right.
It'd be interesting. Maybe there's some mechanism tied to, reproductive biology that we don't know about yet. Once they pass that, they're eating mostly mammals and occasionally birds. There's the Harry Green's talked about the famous Wilson's warbler, that Joe Marshall found down in the Sierra San Luis, and then he ate the snake. And then there's trying to think, we had a couple other birds in there. I can't remember what they were right now in our samples, but not many. Right. And so there's a pretty good shift in diet, right around 400. Yep.
Yeah, that's real. I kind of got into birding a little bit over the last few years. My cousin kind of challenged me and my dad into some birding competitions with him and his son-in-law and stuff. So, I always have an eye out for birds, and which is nice when you're looking for a hard to find rattlesnake. You'll probably see a bird or two.
Oh yeah,
a snake. So it gives me something to and so and that was one of the birds that we saw down there in the Palencios was Wilson's warbler.
Oh, really nice.
Yeah. So it kind of brings it together, a little bit.
I tease about birding, but I do a little bit of it. I'm not good at it. And, I get excited over like painted redstarts nesting in a canyon next to one of my snakes. That's kind of fun.
Or a trogon or something in the Chiricahuas, it's pretty cool. I'm headed down tomorrow morning to go look at some long-tailed ducks that are in an area of Salt Lake City that are easy to view and photograph. And I haven't documented those in Utah yet, so I need to take a little trip. But
I wouldn't know a long-tailed duck if it bit me on the toe.
Yeah, they're beautiful. Have a lot of white and black. Yeah, they're neat looking. So I look for them obviously, and they usually stay far away. But there's a pair that's in this canal, and so they're pretty approachable, and they've been there for a week or two. So hopefully they'll be there tomorrow morning.
Cool.
Yeah, kind of fun. It's hard. The more you do it, the harder it is to get new species added to your list. And so I gotta take a little hour and a half drive to make that happen tomorrow.
Cool.
But, yeah. So anyway, back to snakes.
Okay.
Rob.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I think just as this has been great. I had to move some stuff around in the outline or erase. That's all right. I'm happy to do it. So as it naturally comes up, that's
sorry, Rob.
But can we start with kind of the natural history of what we're talking about? So principally the conversation here, right, is on the New Mexico ridge-nosed rattlesnake, which maybe is actually more accurately called a Mexican snake that barely comes into the U.S. in New Mexico principally and a little bit in Arizona. But kind of both from the natural history, what is that snake that we're talking about? And then from the perspective of, it was described, in the late 70s, sort of ambiguously or questionably, in terms of the context relative to the descriptions and kind of what that looks like. Just kind of give us that context. That would be awesome.
Sure. So Willardi obscurus small montane rattlesnake, principally found above about 7,000 feet elevation. They get down lower. We found them as low as 5,000 something in the Palencios, but in the Animus, I don't think we've ever caught one below 7,000 feet ever. And that habitat is disappearing for them. Again, they eat mostly centipedes and lizards. At our site, it was mostly Scalopus yaravi, mountain spiny lizard that they ate. Kirk Setzer did some diet work with I can't remember her name, Estrella Mosina. And they found the same general pattern, that they were eating lizards and centipedes as juveniles and switched to mammals as adult. But they found some evidence that, there's some site-specific variation in the composition of those groups in terms of the species composition. So, they got some Nematophorus and some other things that we got in less abundance. But that pattern seems to hold throughout their range of the 3 mountain ranges. Okay. I suppose I should back up. They're found in the Sierra San Luis in Mexico, which is on the border of Sonora and Chihuahua. Which is a large mountain range and gets pretty darn high. A lot of habitat over 7,000 feet down there.
How high do they go? So you see them above 7,000, but
the highest peak in the San Luis is 8,000 something.
Okay, and, so it's a fairly
same thing in the Animus. So it's a pretty narrow band, right?
Yeah.
With climate change and these habitats shifting upward in elevation.
Right.
They're on sinking ships, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And so the Animus population is in New Mexico. It's a privately owned property, and folks, are not allowed in there without permission. I heard a story from the landowners recently of a fellow that had to get arrested at the gate going into the north end of Animus Mountain by the sheriff because he was being kind of belligerent about going to look for snakes. And and it's on the Continental Divide. It's the south end of the Continental Divide there. There's good habitat there. It gets 7,000 up to 8,000 and change, and, good ponderosa pine forest in places, lots of Mexican white pine at the very top, a couple aspen groves, right? So,
okay.
And not quite as wet and mesic as the San Luis, and not nearly as big in terms of overall area. And then the third population or occupied mountain range is the Palencio Mountains, which, is Coronado National Forest and open access. Lots of folks have gone down there to look for them off of Geronimo Trail where it crosses. And that's the lowest, there's Palencios don't get up to 7,000 feet, nowhere near. They get up to 6 and change. And the snakes generally we find most of them have been found at the higher elevation of the Palencios. Reproductive biology, they have about 5 babies on average in a litter. They can coil up on a quarter. They weigh 4 grams. They're tiny and extremely susceptible to desiccation. I imagine juvenile survivorship's pretty darn low. We don't have a lot of hard data on that. The mating season, they birth in the monsoon season, as you would predict. You got a little tiny baby snake like that dries up in a hot breeze. And so they wait for those monsoons to come along before they give birth. So, early mid-July until end of August, that's when most of the litters appear. And interestingly, that's also when the mating season is. So they're also mating during that window as well. Moms, we've documented skipping 2 years before they reproduced again. So reproduce.
Is that particular to a certain population? Do the Sierra San Luis reproduce more frequently, or is it kind of overall? We don't have much data on reproduction from the Sierra San Luis and frequency of reproduction anyway.
Right. Because we've only been doing mark recapture down there for a couple of years now associated with this Recovery Challenge Award. But, most of that data came from John Porter's study of Willardi in the Huachucas, which is That guy's amazing. I don't know if you guys know John, but he's a really dedicated guy. He's got 40 years of data working.
Okay. Yeah,
and his approach is totally different to ours. I mean, he doesn't weigh and measure snakes, pit tag them, and those kind of things. He stops, sits down, photographs them, draws their patterns, comes up with ways to identify them from their pattern, keeps track of individuals over years, knows where they hang out so he can just go there. No telemetry. It's really cool. Jane Goodall kind of stuff. Yeah. It's really different. You can't get a dissertation even in 11 years doing that, but but it's a really neat alternative strategy to understanding the animals, and so he was generous enough to share a bunch of his data from his animals. And so that's included in our reproduction paper on Willerai. And then we got a ton from the Animus too. And so it's a combined data set looking at those two subspecies. And, every once in a while they'll reproduce in consecutive years, but most of the time they're skipping a year. Sometimes they're skipping two.
Where it seems like the populations are a little heavier in Mexico, do you think they might reproduce more frequently? Do you think if the conditions were better, they would, or is it?
I think, I imagine this mostly has to do with energy reserves, prey availability, and those kind of things. And if mom's got enough body fat, she's going to go, and if she doesn't, she's not. And it just depends on what they can get done after they give birth in July 15th, and they manage to eat a bunch of big meals before they go down, and get one in the early spring. They might go again the next year. We didn't see a lot of evidence of that, but we have really small sample sizes too. So hard saying, not knowing, as they say on the river.
Something to be determined, right? Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you mind walking through a little bit sort of what you found in terms of the differences in allele frequencies amongst the different populations?
So the genetic work that I did was, in the late 90s, and I used microsatellites, which are small sections of DNA that have a repetitive element in them. Like it might be, you've got A, T, C, and G, right, in DNA. And so it might be A, T, A, T, A, T, A, T, repeat. And the variable, it doesn't code for anything, right? So this isn't a piece of DNA that's coding for a protein or some other, so presumably neutral, right? And, but the variation there is in the number of times that repeats. And the great thing about microsatellites is that they're hypervariable. They're not just variable, they're hypervariable. So at most genetic loci, they're either invariant or there's, a couple alleles, but that's it. Right. At microsatellite loci, you could have 22, 30 plus alleles, right? And so that makes them an ideal thing for looking at questions at the level of population structure and below, down to relatedness and paternity and maternity, right? And so they're really good for that. They're, at least if you have enough of them, not as great for like doing phylogeny and stuff like that. So I use microsatellites. I think if I remember a minute, but I had, which was pretty decent for the time. People are using larger data sets these days and new analytical techniques, just, for the record. But using the microsatellites, and we got decent samples. I mean, the amazing thing is, we had, more than enough from the Animus. And we had a nice sample of I think 20 or so animals from this San Luis, all from one location, kind of centrally located place called El Pinito. And then we got 18 animals, samples from 18 animals in the Palancios, which, that took years, and it took crews of people. And at that time, our catch per unit effort was a little over 30 person days per Obscurus. So you can get that there. We looked a lot to get those 18 samples, which was a pretty decent sample size for us to make some, inferences on, from what we found from the analyses, the genetic analyses. So basically what we found is that, those populations have been separated for quite some time. They're on independent evolutionary trajectories. There's no migration between mountain ranges. Not surprisingly, the Sierra San Luis were the most diverse, highest heterozygosity. Every measure you can think of genetically, they were elevated. Mm-hmm. Animus were second, and not in bad shape at all. And the Pelencios were just genetically depauperate. And in fact, we used I don't know if people are even using this anymore, but a measure of bottlenecks that was developed by, I think, Monty Slatkin, a measure called M, and it was developed specifically for microsatellites. And I can't remember offhand what that M value was, but I remember at the time noticing that it was lower than that value for elephant seals that went through this tremendous bottleneck, right? And that was documented demographically. So I don't think there's any question that the Pelencios is the population that's in the greatest peril. It shows up in their genes. You can tell it by looking at the habitat. Our catch per unit effort. 30 person days of snake back in the 90s, 2 independent measures were up at 100 person days per snake. Mm-hmm. One of the students whose committee I'm on, Saunders, spent just summer after summer down there and calculated all his days. And he finally found one, but, it was well over 100 person days.
Yeah. Now, is that counting like maybe times that would be off peak, where you're probably not going to find one or not the best time to look? Or is this like concentrated on best time to look,
For Saunders, it was because, he had a dissertation to do. So he was down there in off peak times as well.
Right.
But there's also some folks that, are just enthusiasts and went down there. And spent, obviously they were driving long distances to get to the Pelencios. So they were targeting the best times to go.
Right.
And they were over 100 person days.
Okay.
So, and when we went to, in 2017, we went and looked for them in Skeleton Canyon, and that was over 100 person days. So there's 3 independent measures that, I think there's been a decline in the last, 35 years, 25 years.
Yeah, it definitely looks like that population is kind of on its way out, or, maybe not viable anymore. I guess is it a multiple factor thing? Is it mostly due to climate change, or, we've understood that maybe fires play a role in that, and maybe dry years would contribute. But what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's multifactorial. I think there's a lot of things. I think mostly it's climate change, and not just the anthropogenic climate change that we've induced, but the climate change that's happened over the Holocene, right? Probably in some way tied to that bottleneck. I have no evidence for that, but I would guess that's the case, that, as these lower elevation mountains dried, they became less and less able to support willardi populations. And so that probably had something to do with the historical bottleneck.
Right.
And then certainly this anthropogenic climate change isn't helping things. Fire's playing a non-natural role there. And, at least currently, there's good news on the horizon for that. But I think it's low quality habitat to begin with. And, you've got these snakes that sure you find them out in grasslands, but I'll tell you what, there's going to be a oak and pine canyon somewhere nearby within their crawl radius. Right. Yeah. So I think that's kind of the core of their habitat in the Pelencios, and it's disappearing. And when you let fuels build up for 100 years and then you get a fire, it takes that habitat out and starts converting everything to grassland.
Yeah. So I guess a question I would have then is that population, is it possible to save it? Is it worth, the effort to try to save it, or do we just say, hey, we've got Animus and Sierra San Luis?
I think it's, given the number of unknowns at this point, I think it's worth a try, especially if those efforts aren't enormous investments of conservation resources, et cetera. So, for example, the one thing I didn't mention is, there's a problem genetically there as well. How much of the decline is because there's not much genetic variation left in the population? And so are they on the brink of what we call the extinction vortex, right? And so in conservation genetics. And so I think that's a good question. That's why, we wrote this Recovery Challenge Award and brought some of those much more genetically diverse individuals from the Sierra San Luis up and released them into the Palencios. The idea there is maybe if we can restore some genetic diversity, that will help the situation. The other thing that's going on is the habitat thing. There's not a lot we can do about climate change,
right.
individually or as a state, or I think that's a humanity as a whole problem that I don't know that that we even are trying.
No easy answers, right? Yeah.
So, I don't think we're even trying to solve that one. So not very hard anyway. And but what can we do? We can manage that landscape to try and retain the habitat features that we think are most closely associated with willardi. And right now, the Coronado National Forest is doing just that. They've got a giant, long-term kind of fuels abatement and fire plan that they're looking at for the Palencios. And front and center of that plan is this small rattlesnake. And so they're consulting with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm encouraging Saunders, whose dissertation is primarily about fire and snakes and the Palencios, to engage with them. And I'm hoping, they're looking at the whole toolbox. They're looking at, going in there and grubbing out, shrubs where they need to, mesquite. They're looking at herbicides. They're looking at using prescribed fire where appropriate. And I think that's good. I think they can do a lot.
Right.
Fire out of control down there is a bad thing, but no fire down there is a worse thing. It's a worse thing because you're just waiting for the inferno.
Building up, yeah.
That mountain range would experience, you look at from the Swetnam and Bassan lab at U of A, you look at the tree ring data and all of those mountain ranges down there, big sweeping fires would come out of those grasslands and go up into those mountains and burn about once a decade, and that kept, fuel levels down. It kept more open stands of trees and it was a maintaining influence. And that's obviously not the way it's behaving in the Sky Islands today.
Right. Yeah. That's multifactorial problems require a multifactorial answer, right?
Yeah, sorry.
I also had a question about,
put a quarter.
Right. The bottlenecking, genetic wise. I wonder too if along with that, if there are any adaptations to, surviving in a warmer, lower elevation habitat. And how in the grand scheme of things, if you're looking at diversifying, adding other populations that may not have those adaptations, it would play a part.
Could you swamp the local genetic variation?
Right.
Yeah. And the answer is you probably could, but everything, and I'm not, a conservation geneticist by any stretch, right? I haven't done conservation genetics since my dissertation, but I follow some articles here and there and read up when I start thinking about moving animals between mountain ranges. And it turns out that, that was a big fear back when I was in grad school, that if you move these animals around, in fact, I remember being in a graduate student reading group, and Phil Hedrick, an eminent conservation geneticist, he had gotten a request from, I think, the Fish and Wildlife Service, I'm not sure, to try and model at what rate they should move Texas cougars into the Florida panther population and preserve the uniqueness of that Florida panther population and any, local adaptive variation that might be there, because those things they were getting born with kinked tails and testes with descent and all that. And so it was like, so we all played as a group and modeled this, and they ended up executing that. And it turns out that study after study after study, it's pretty hard to swamp local genetic variation. people were very conservative about that at first. And then as time went by, populations are about to blink out and they bring animals in. But natural selection is a pretty powerful force.
Right. And I imagine if the offspring got those, selective or beneficial genes, then they'd be the ones that would survive and reproduce. And so they would get maybe the benefit of outcrossing, however you want to term that. But, and then also have those, inherent, benefits of their local genetic structure.
Right. And I suspect, it's been 10,000 years. And I mean, these guys are not Drosophila. They are not breeding once a month. And, population size is small. And so, how much meaningful genetic change can happen over 10,000 years? I mean, even in a long-lived organism that's, with the generation lengths that Willardii has, there still could be some local adaptation there. And so, so that's something we really thought about. We moved 12 animals from the San Luis into the Palencios, and I don't know what summer that was. And my advice has consistently been since then that, before we do a whole lot more of that, that we need to bring in conservation geneticists and evaluate, use modern molecular techniques to evaluate the amount of variation there and make some recommendations at what level we should be doing that. Right.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
No, just on that context, since we're coming naturally to it, we'll play the game. I did want to ask you some questions, sort of, and I know a partner, right, in the Project Obscurus has been the Rattlesnake Solutions folks. And I understand that you guys took some hints from them around sort of what that release process even looks like. So I did have some kind of specific questions. So when Justin and I were down there last year, and, from talking to someone, I don't think this was indicative or actually what it was, but it certainly there was a certain site that struck me in a certain way. Did you guys, in terms of releasing them, presumably you didn't just Yahtzee them onto the landscape. So did you find, utilize natural refugia that existed? Did you build up structures, something to give that functionality?
So we did. And, you brought up a really important point. Yes, we brought in Rattlesnake Solutions specifically because of their expertise with, translocating and releasing animals, and solicited their advice because we hadn't done a lot of that. We catch rattlesnakes, we take them back where we found them, right? And we're kind of careful about what time of day and all that sort of thing. But that's why we brought Brian Hughes and Rattlesnake Solutions in, and they had great advice for us. We'd also were fortunate that a paper came out just immediately before this that was, sort of this meta-analysis of all these snake translocation studies. And from that, what we got is that in general, releasing them young, and I'm not going to say this works with every species, but releasing youngsters and releasing them in groups and in the appropriate habitat and at the appropriate time of day, that was what was leading to the most success in animals being around long term. Brian specifically said, look for the microhabitats that you're used to finding them in, where there's a retreat where they can go in. Try and do it late in the day so that there's not, thermal stress, or do it first thing in the morning so that they go down and they're in a hole and they stay there for the day. And then, they get a little used to that particular site. So we followed those recommendations. And interestingly enough, what we ended up doing, we had a permit. And by the way, that entire project, I international, right? And there's recovery permits, there's import permits, there's export permits from Mexico, there's fieldwork permits from Mexico, there's state permits, there's, veterinary review. It's insane. You run the gauntlet. 12 permits. So we had permits to bring 12 in and release them. And when we were down in the San Luis for this collecting trip, so we needed 42 snakes to import to the United States, because 30 of those were going to go to our zoo partners, where we're going to start trying some captive breeding and messing around with them. And so that's 42 snakes we got to catch. And we're down there for like 3 days. It's dry. We're not catching snakes. We're catching a snake here and there. And it's like, we are not going to catch 42 snakes by the time we leave. And then it rained. And we ended up with plenty of snakes. And a lot of them were pregnant females. And so we ended up sending a pregnant female back, among their 10 they got a pregnant female too. So, which was totally legal, right? Yeah. But you're sweating it on the way to the border, let me tell you, because you don't want to have to turn around and go back.
Right.
And so we had one of those females was in captivity, and she did pop while we were holding her before we transported her back. She had 9 babies, which is the record litter size. It matched the record litter size. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had her. We had a juvenile, probably young of the year male from the previous year. And we had another female that was pregnant. I think I palped 5 babies in her, but I could be off. And so we ended up bringing those 12 snakes in, the 9 neonates and mom, the pregnant female, and that young of the year male. And we released mom and her babies in what Saunders and myself and everyone who's been working with them for 30 years felt that looks like the kind of place a mom has babies, right? Mm-hmm. There's a retreat, there's a little sunny spot, and so we released them. They all retreated in there. They stayed there for 7 days after until the baby shed and dispersed. So they treated it like a natal site, which was awesome.
Wow.
And mom hung out there for 14 months. And we went back and retrieved her and took her transmitter out and a temperature data logger that was in her as well. The only one where you recovered from that study, which is amazing. Mm-hmm. And so the other mom and that young of the year male, we released at a different site nearby, but different site. Never saw her again, but we didn't have a transmitter in her because she was, gravid. Mm-hmm. And so I think it went well. Juvenile survivorship's low. All 9 of those babies didn't make it, but it's really not 9. It's, 14 probably, 15 counting that little male. So that's quite a bit of babies. I imagine a couple of them might make it.
Yeah.
And to adulthood.
Yeah.
And, there's hope.
Sorry. Did you aim to release them in an area where areas where you knew that animals had been found, or was it in the context of saying, hey, we know that they're kind of adjacent to this, so we're not getting in a resource issue, resource conflict position? What was the idea with that?
The idea with that was if it's genetic rescue, there better be somebody
nearby. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's kind of somebody needs to mate with those ladies, right?
Sure. Absolutely. And that's one thing, as I was kind of considering putting together notes for the conversation today, is that's a little bit of a different approach to the Louisiana pine snake reintroduction program, where they're putting them into an area that has suitable habitat, but for which there are no known records in that area, right? Obviously, that's different because that's not translocating snakes, that's releasing captive progeny, so a little bit different. But that's why I was curious about that. But as you say, knowing that the attempt was to get intergradation, right, with those animals, that I assumed that there would have been known snakes in that area.
Yeah, there were. And, honestly, and they were places where we had captured snakes in the past. But honestly, I don't know that we really even have the option that they had with the Louisiana pine snake, because you said suitable habitat. And most of the places that there's suitable habitat in the Palancios, there's snakes there or pretty darn nearby. And so... And, the other thing is that I think, population densities, I think, vary tremendously across that Palancio landscape. I think in some canyons, some little localized canyons, that there might be some nice little deams of snakes in there. But there's other canyons that are exceptionally long, and we've spent tremendous amounts of time in them, and we caught 3 snakes. and over 4 years. And one of them was a female. She gave birth to a litter. And we took genes from all the babies and from mom and went back and did paternity testing. And the only other 2 snakes we caught in that canyon were males, and one of them was daddy. So what does that tell you about population density in that canyon, And they were a ways away from each other at the time they were captured.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, that was another thing I wanted to talk about. Yeah, what's your impression, I guess, in all 3 populations, but particularly the Palencios of, or the Animus, maybe because the sample size is bigger, of their movement within that space, right? I think, are they moving across canyons within the Animus? Are they, what does that look like?
No, in the Animus, so we worked in 2 canyons. We worked primarily in Indian Creek Canyon and also in West Fork Canyon. I should say that the other way around. Primarily West Fork Canyon and also Indian Canyon. And they're adjacent to one another with a high grassy ridge in between them. And mark recapture for 30 years. Hundreds of snakes marked. We have never recaptured a snake from one canyon in the other. And yet, when you look at the genetic data from those 2 canyons, they move between those canyons, or at least their genes do, right? That doesn't mean individuals have to, but genes are moving. So low density intervening populations, genes can move through those. It could be, a migrant once a generation would do that. It doesn't take many migrants to get gene flow, right? Mm-hmm. So, they're a contiguous population from a genetic perspective, but in terms of individual movements, we've just never documented it. Our telemetry data tells us, that these guys have really small home ranges, on the order of a couple hectares. They're not, movers and shakers. Mm-hmm. And, all the animals that we had transmitters in West Fork Canyon, I think one time we had a snake go up over a ridge and come right back. All of them stayed in that little bowl on the north face of Animus Mountain. And obviously, the pregnant females are, sitting in these teeny little home ranges. So, not movers and shakers. Very, very different from the one female blacktail that I put a transmitter in just for giggles because we couldn't catch any willardi. And she went up almost to the peak from the plateau where our camp was at 7,200 feet. She went almost to the peak, turned around, came back down past the plateau, down to about 6,400 feet in one summer. Those guys get around.
Yeah. Right.
So that was kind of surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess as a natural question relative to the work that David done in the compendium that Gordy, amongst others, had put together, does your lived experience corroborate that there is sort of phenotypic variation, maybe particularly in the facial characteristics amongst the 3 ranges?
The 3 ranges. I would say that any feature I could find in one of those ranges, with the exception of the Palencios, because our sample size is so low, so I don't know. But between the Animus and the San Luis, I haven't seen a snake in one of those ranges that didn't look like a snake in the other range. Now, some of those phenotypes are pretty rare. A little bit of, yellow showing up or a little bit of faint facial markings. The hues on the background, we get pretty brown-looking critters in the Animus sometimes. The proportions of those characters vary between the mountain ranges, in my experience. There tend to be more of the brownish individuals, and you encounter the ones with the facial markings more often down in the San Luis than you do up in the Animus. I think they change a bit on it genetically too. A lot of the little ones, I've seen slate gray little ones too. So, but some of the little ones, are kind of, I don't know. I wonder about that. I guess I should say, is there a change where those little guys are a little bit browner and they get grayer as they get older? Right. I haven't seen a whole lot of great big snakes that were super brown in any of those ranges.
Absolutely. So, you had a really neat story from the Animus, I think, about you had an endangered food chain predation story. Yeah. If you could touch on that, that'd be great.
So, we had a radio tagged snake that went missing one day. And then finally one day they got the signal, and there were a pair of, what are they? The spotted owls that were up there in the Animas. And there's a reason spotted owls are endangered. You could walk up to within 10 feet of those things, man, and they just sit on the branch. You're like, all right, this is why. You need to recognize predators. All right. So anyway, we knew where their roost was. And so the signal from that snake was coming from that roost. And underneath them, there was also a red tail near that roost, I believe. And so we're not sure, it was right in that area. But half the snake, the back half of the snake was laying there with the transmitter in it. And a state endangered pocket gopher in its gut. So there you have it. You've got this federally endangered rattlesnake, that ate this state endangered gopher getting eaten by a federally threatened bird.
Oh man,
a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
full of life stuff right there.
Right.
Absolutely. And I do want to note for any folks who are listening here, right, that it's illegal to pursue federally threatened or endangered species, and pursue can be taken to include looking for. So, something to bear in mind, both in terms of driving people's activity and how they talk about their activity, for sure.
Absolutely.
But that being said, when you have your survey teams out there, so we have a lot of conversation on here about field herping techniques, and sometimes different things work different ways. And we talk about going fast versus going slow. And sometimes that, are we going slow and methodically looking at each different thing? Or are we just kind of bursting through that habitat, hoping that's, there's a reason people on bicycles or in cars come upon snakes that maybe move away as soon as they're kind of perceiving that stuff, versus looking under every rock or clump of grass or something like that. Those are kind of two different things. When your teams are surveying stuff, are they doing often in our groups, we're doing a mix of those things, right? Some people are, they're more comfortable going kind of slow at their own pace and walking through. Other people want to get where they have in their own mind, whether that actually effectuates a snake or not. Do you have any thoughts on that relative to the Palencios? Recognizing, I will say that, the Palencios are brutal in terms of atypical steps, undergrowth, all those things. And so, what fast looks like certainly looks different in a canyon bottom in the Palencios than it does on a trail anywhere.
I will answer unequivocally. Slow and mindful. Yeah. And not because I'm the guy that does that, because I don't have that great success, but, I get distracted, squirrel, painted red stuff, whatever. And, but watching the field crews that I've worked with for 30 years, the people who come back with the most snakes are the people who are pretty slow and methodical. And, there was a gal that was down there, found one in the Palencios that I stepped over. Mm-hmm. I stepped over the snake, but she's kind of head down, looking around, absorbing the environment kind of person. And, our strapping Texan and New Mexico guys that find the most snakes, they're also, tend to move slower through the environment. I mean, they go long and they go hard, but they are not thrashing through the environment. They are paying attention. They are poking. They are looking under things, and they're the most successful year after year after year. I think, there are, we get the young bucks that come in and they just go hard and fast, and they'll come back, usually with mostly lepidus.
Okay.
So.
And kind of in the same vein, that is really good. In the same vein, are folks looking at the same areas that they feel really good about repetitively? Or are they kind of, one day they're jumping from place to place? I was amazed when we were down there we were getting early and often storms, which is good for the Palencios, but not good for us maybe seeing stuff. But I was amazed at the difference in impact that we were seeing even one canyon over. Like, so we were, the storms coming in below us and then seeing the impact on Canyon 1 versus Canyon 2, all the dramatic differences in those things. Yeah.
So, yeah, people tend to have their favorite, 30 years, a lot of us have been going down to the Animas. And so people have their favorite places they like to go where they had success last time. We've all got our biases, right? But we find them in unique places as well. I mean, sometimes you just want to go see something else. And, or you're tired of, I'm going to say something that will offend you deeply, but you're tired of finding Obscurus and you want to go find a Lepidus.
Rubbing the salt in the wound.
Sorry. I'll give you a mea culpa so that it's mutual later on. But so one thing we found is that, you get up above the tree line, and Toby Hibbets found this. He got up above tree line in Indian Creek and started working the Nolina patches and the bunch grasses up there in this kind of steep oak savanna with a lot of rocks, but not quite talus. And boy, he found lots of big willardi up there. Not a lot of little ones, not a lot of females, but he was finding a bunch of males up there. And we get weird things. Last year, Jill and Hippie and the whole Rattlesnake Solution squad had 18 willardi day. It was it was 2 days actually. They found just snake after snake after snake in this one canyon bottom in 200 yards of canyon bottom, and then they went back to release those the next day, and boom, they got hit again with a smaller batch, but still another batch, which and other people are out crawling hillsides and doing whatever, and they got none those 2 days.
Right.
So it's variable. I think it's very weather dependent. I think there is something to there's absolutely something to precipitation, but I think that, everybody says, it's the day after the rain and the steam is rising off the rocks. And, I think there's some truth in that. There's some truth in that. Post rain, not in the rain, you're probably not going to have as much luck. You can't hear, and you certainly wouldn't be able to hear an Obscurus rattle in the rain.
Yeah.
And that's how we find many of them, right?
Yeah. Speaking of that, so, I mean, willardi tend to maybe buzz and then go, try to get down under, plants or rocks or whatever, and then they kind of stop rattling. It seems, but we got buzzed by something that sounded like it was a small, rattlesnake rattle, and then it kind of went down in this bunch grass and stopped, and we couldn't locate what it was. And I'm wondering if there are any insects that would mimic or sound very similar to that you've encountered, or do you think we just didn't get to see it?
No, nothing that's sustained like a rattle. There's some little things out there. I don't even know what they are, but they're easy to discern from a rattlesnake. I will say that, after decades of catching those two species together, you can tell them apart by the sound of the rattle. Mm-hmm. Not all the time, but, at the ends of that spectrum of there's a little middle part where, it's hard to tell. You got a small Lepidus or a big willardi or something, that can sound kind of similar, but even an adult willardi doesn't sound like a Lepidus,
Yeah.
And there's a difference to it.
Right. So we sat there and kind of waited around and watched and tried to see if we could see anything, but nothing. So I didn't know if it was some bug messing with us or what, but it sure sounded like a rattlesnake,
Was it very long? Did it go zzz?
It was sustained for quite a while until we, move around or something that would kind of stop. But we'd hear it, and it was mostly when we were getting closer to it that it would, sustain. And then it sounded like it went down or under something, and then it stopped.
Yeah. That dive, they'll often stop. They'll dive for a while and they'll rattle while diving, and then stop once they feel they're in a safe spot, or they're gone down there.
Right.
Depending on what you're finding them in.
Yeah.
Some of those talus slides, you could dig to the core and
right. Which is we don't tend to disturb habitat, in pursuit. So we were just hoping to, get a glimpse in the grass or something. But and then the next day we came back to the same spot, and a little further up the canyon got buzzed with the same sound, the same nature of it, where it was kind of prolonged for a bit, went down, got muffled, and then it stopped, and we're just like, come on. So I don't know if we're just very unlucky and not seeing it or what.
Or that's when you wonder, like, okay, we're just maybe misinterpreting, that.
Yeah.
Is that even likely where we're just misinterpreting what's happening? Yeah.
Right. I can't do anything. So.
Yeah. Well, that makes it worse. No.
Yeah. That doesn't help.
You're supposed to say, yeah, there's a bug that sounds just like them, and then I'll feel better about it. Yeah. Not seeing it.
So we, highlighted, right, that the Palencios seems like low densities of everything, right? Not only Obscurus, but everything. At least my lived, even centipedes, right? So hitting on what we've talked about. There was one spot in particular, though, where it was not a low density of whip snakes. And I was curious if you had any thoughts on interactions between whip snakes and Obscurus, because that seems like it could potentially have a it seemed like a maybe a non-correlated so that in that area it didn't feel super likely that we'd find a small montane rattlesnake in an area that had plenty of whip snakes.
Yeah. And those guys get big too. Mm-hmm. Toby, who I mentioned earlier, caught the record length Masticophis bilineatus in the Animus a couple years back. Giant. I mean, that snake was, there's like 4 guys lined up holding it, and scars all up and down his body. He was a king cobra. And so we have no evidence of them eating willardi. Having said that, I don't doubt that they do. And we had, I think, 5 radio tracked male snakes in the San Luis that we also had these temperature data loggers in. Mm-hmm. And we're going to take body temperatures I think it was 10 or 15 minutes for a year. So we'd have a full year's, body temperature data on these snakes. We recovered none of those snakes. Mm. And the first one we went after, Saunders got the signal, and it was under a rock, and they flipped the rock to get this snake because, we don't flip when we're hunting snakes, but when we're trying to recover a radio tag snake that's got a year of data, there's an exception to policy there. And there it was. They had to sift through the dirt, but no snake at all. Just both the radio tag and the temperature data logger were there. We think, and this is a rock that, nothing but another snake or something like that's going to get underneath it. Right. And so the most popular hypothesis in camp was that it was eaten by a bilineatus. And when we looked at the data on the temperature data logger, it was clear that snake lived for about a week after we released it. It got eaten and then pooped out under a rock. So,
oh man,
kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
That's unfortunate.
That was the only one of the 5 we recovered. The others we just couldn't. So, except for that female we translocated, we got 14 months of temperature data from her, which that was an eye opener. I'll tell you. So
yeah. Well, and just the fact that it was alive and well in that new landscape 14 months later is interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's even better. So we tracked that female intermittently because nobody was living down there, right? So somebody go down and we give them a receiver and an antenna, and they'd look around for the snake, and it was mostly Saunders. And and he found her a few times, and we just left her alone, took a location, but she didn't, she never went more than 100 yards from where we released her, and which is pretty typical for a female willardi. But she's in a new mountain range, right? And so, and then we couldn't get signal. We came back so we released her in July. We tracked her up until just a little, I think October or so. And then we couldn't get her, I think, in November. And then we couldn't get her the next year at all. And Saunders was back there recovering these OTMs, these operative temperature models that we spread all over the landscape in the Palacios and the Sierra San Luis. And he was on the team recovering those. And he just thought, well, what the heck, I'll go by that old release location. And he said he's standing there, and all of a sudden he's like, it smells like snake musk, And he had just given up looking for her. And all of a sudden this bilineatus shoots up the hillside, and he's like, holy crap. And he looks back where that snake came from, and there she was sitting right there.
Whoa.
And so we went over there, and he went over there and captured her. And it was like, oh my gosh, we got to data log her back, and how magical this is. The one day he's there, he rescues her from being eaten. So although we have no evidence of them being consumed, we do have the evidence of that attack, because when he got it back to the car, the bite marks, the teeth marks from that bilineatus were all up and down her body.
Whoa.
Really evident on the ventral scutes,
Yeah.
And so Saunders saved her life.
Wow. That's very fortunate. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we had our vet take the tags out, and we took her back up there, and Saunders and I had a little ceremony releasing her, and said, may you never see a human being again in your life.
Right.
Or a bilineatus.
More important.
Yeah. You see a human being, it's at the same time as a bilineatus.
Yeah. I think a human might be less of a concern than,
Well, we put her through the ringer,
Right. So. Yeah.
Yeah. One, I guess the other possible small exception, not to the same degree as the whip snakes and probably nowhere near as concerning relative to montane rattlesnakes, was one canyon. It was amazing. So as I say, we could kind of come on the front end. There maybe had been a little bit of rain, but not much. And we had explored a particular canyon, and then we started getting day after day of consecutive rain, including stuff that washed out even the paved road on the way down there in New Mexico. And the Sonoran mud turtles in that canyon, it's amazing that they're able to survive in that environment. And then just the change within a week of us being there was amazing.
Yeah. Those populations have been studied by Paul Stone for, I think, 40 years. He's been down there doing mark recapture with those kind of sternin. So, it's a really interesting system, because most of those drainages dry up completely, or, they'll have the intermittent puddles for part of the year, but flowing, that's, maybe a couple weeks. And, and yet there they are.
It's incredible. Yeah. We saw one that had a
size classes. Yeah. This is what you can say.
Yeah.
Justin.
Yeah.
Little
just
guy.
Missing a chunk of its shell, something had chewed on it, and
raccoon or something. I don't know.
Yeah. What are some of the other predators down there that would potentially take an obscurus?
Jaguars.
That'd be cool.
There's mountain lions. One of the guys working our study was there, and I don't know, later in the year, October or something like that, early October, and an early snowfall came in, and he was camped somewhere off Geronimo Trail, and he woke up in the morning. There was an inch of snow. It was gone by the end of the day, and there was a big cat print next to his tent, and so he took a picture of it with a quarter. We gave it to Dave Brown, the guy who did Biotic Communities of the Southwest, and he had a buddy that was doing this giant analysis on being able to discern mountain lion from jaguars, and that guy said unequivocally jaguar.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's so cool.
So
that's very cool.
Yeah. Talk about hard to find, I think that's an order of magnitude above an obscurus.
Yeah. There were feral pigs there for a while. I think, the smaller willardi, they at risk from mountain king snakes. Coatis, I bet you would take them. And there's some coati. So I think they've got a birds of prey, obviously. And spotted owls may, I think, take them. So
seem like they're kind of towards the bottom of the food chain, at least at a smaller size.
They aren't way up there.
Yeah.
It's not a big old,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's not a big old, 5.5 foot diamondback or anything, right?
Right.
Yeah. It seemed like maybe we were seeing bear scat. Does that sound?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's bears there. Yeah. I wonder about bears. We find bears do a lot of digging in talus, and nobody knows why they do that down here. you get up north in Alaska and grizzlies will dig into talus for these hibernating mothballs that are down. These moths, and they'll eat the moths because they're just really nutrient rich or something. And, bears will eat just about freaking anything. And so, very possible. We see flipped rocks on our hillsides.
Yeah.
When we got to the Animas in 93, there were already holes in the virgin talus up there. I mean, nobody had been in there since the 70s, right? Since after Keeper and the Kept came out, and there was an onslaught at that time. And these looked more recent. They didn't look, old. Right. So I think the bears are digging in the talus. I don't know what for, if they're digging in there for snakes or what they're digging in there for. But
yeah, we saw something similar in the Chiricahuas where this hillside was just trashed from, I assume, bears, because it was just indiscriminate rolling of logs and rocks, and either that or pigs. I don't know. It was up kind of high, so I was thinking bear would be the most likely, but kind of crazy.
They kind of have a reputation for being unethical herpers. So.
Right. Eating the snake after they find it. And
they don't put the rock back. They eat the snake.
Yeah, we had seen that in the Chiricahuas as well, at high elevation in the Chiricahuas, where it was like, I'm looking at these flipped rocks and I'm going like, who seriously would have come here and done this? And then someone else in our group was like, that's obviously a bear, dude. That's not a herper that was doing this, choosing now to start doing this relative to where we were at.
Right. Yeah. A heavily monitored area that would have got them a hefty fine if they would have been flipping rocks like that.
Yeah, we've got tons of bear encounter stories from the Animas. Just story after story. You imagine with 30 years, right?
Right.
Just really fun times.
Got to keep you on your toes, right?
They do. They do keep you on your toes.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I have a relatively niche question about the Palencios. It seems like it's probably interesting geologically. So kind of what I would call the western side, is this red rock that's a little bit softer, a little bit more pliable. The eastern stuff is a little bit more of a, it's a cherty sort of tan into purple, interesting color. Have you noticed any interesting correlations? It's also very sharp, very difficult to walk on, gets very slippery. If you had any thoughts as to any of that?
I don't. Saunders does. He has some very specific ideas about the rocks. I probably should let him talk about it so I don't misrepresent his thoughts, but there's dacite down there, and he has these ideas about not just where he thinks that's fairly predictive for Lepidus, and also, I can't remember which way it went, but also with fire behavior down there. So maybe you should, that guy spent
fascinating
years walking around. You guys should bring him on the show and just, him and his dog. Alone for ever.
That may be a question as well, as have you used any dogs in searches?
His dog did find snakes for him.
Really? Oh, that's cool. Yep. I always thought about that. My dog's too dumb to. Well, French bulldog. He's not going to be a very good sniffer. But
he's got a scrappy little terrier kind of dog. I don't know what kind of dog it is. Arroyo, and that dog is clever. So
that's cool. I've heard of them being used for tortoise surveys and finding tortoises and things, but never. I guess you run a risk if you're having your dog send out rattlesnakes that they it could be a little dangerous for the dog. But
unless they're really well trained,
right.
There's guys out there that are do training for rattlesnake avoidance with dogs, of course.
Yeah,
Chip Cochran and others, and so I imagine if you can train the avoidance, you can also train them to point from safe distances. Dogs are clever.
Right. That's true. Some dogs,
Some dogs.
Not my dog. He's just a bowling ball.
Is there a plan to either continue collecting genetic data or samples from either Animas palencios or assurance population animals associated with any of this project from either of those places?
Yes. on both counts. So we want our captive breeding to be guided by conservation genetics so that we can maximize the diversity. 30 is a pretty small, it's more than 30. It's like somewhere between 30 and 50, depending on how many of those babies, that were born made it. We had a little bit of juvenile mortality initially, but not a ton. I'd say the vast majority of those 50 or so animals are still alive. And but we want that. That's a small population, the 5,500 rule and in genetics. And so, there we are. We're right at 50 or so. And so we really want to maintain that genetic variation without having to go back out to the wild and bring wild animals in constantly into this assurance population. And so we've been talking to Dustin Wood at USGS about coming up with those recommendations for what crosses would maximize diversity in our captive colony. And he's also going to, evaluate the diversity and what's going on in the 3 mountain ranges and make some specific recommendations there, specifically with regard to at what rate we should be translocating animals into the Palencia Mountains.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other mountain ranges in New Mexico or that are close by that you would expect them to be in and they just aren't? That might be a site to
Louisiana pine model, shall we call it? Yeah. Or even the future, right? Based on predictive climate modeling going forward, that sort of thing.
Right. So Chiricahuas has always been a mystery. Why there's no willardi there?
Mm-hmm.
They're not in the Mule Mountains either, but slower, smaller range, so it's not quite as surprising. The Pinolinos, Mount Graham. There's twin spots at the top of that thing, but the other montanes are missing there. There's Yaravi there. There's green rat snakes there. There's a bunch of that Madrian element that make it up into the Pinolinos. I don't know if Willardi lepidus never made it up there, or they made it and didn't make it.
Right.
So I guess one of the more controversial things that's kind of was in our minds when we wrote the recovery plan. In fact, I would say it actually spurred the entire project was the idea of taking them someplace else where they could survive climate change and assisted migration, right?
Right.
And, it's controversial because people say, oh, you're playing God and, ecological God and this, that, and the other thing. And they never would have made it there. And it's like, well, we already played ecological God, right? It's called anthropogenic climate change. So we're wiping them out or hastening their demise for sure in the Palencios and maybe with enough time in the Animus as well. So that element of our fauna could be lost to the United States. I think they'll hold on in the San Luis. But and if that's the case, if you're doing this bad stuff over here that's making populations blink out, but you have the opportunity to, in an informed way, right, put them someplace where they can persist and not negatively affect the system they're going into, shouldn't we talk about that at the very least, right? There's a lot of people that just have this knee-jerk reaction, to assisted migration. And I think that is folly. I think it's something we should talk about and we should evaluate. And that decision gets made not by, agencies and scientists like me. It gets made by the public. Those kind of things don't happen without public input and a lot of buy-in from a lot of agencies. So one of the things we're doing is Rich Inman at USGS up in Colorado is modeling habitat and the effects of climate change on this snake. We've given him all of our data, every capture location for every Obscurus ever. Dave Barker's stuff, Matt Good's stuff, Kirk Setzer's stuff, my stuff from the Animus and the San Luis, our group stuff, all of it. And so he's working on that right now. In fact, I'll meet with him next week, and we're going to start going over some of the data. But yeah, I think we need to look at where the habitat is right now, especially in the Palencios, and try and use that to guide the fire plan down there and the fuels abatement plan. But I think we also need to be open to the possibility that, that habitat's probably going to be in the Pinolinos or in the Gila Wilderness for a lot longer than it's going to be in the Palancios. And in the case of, well, actually both of those, it's an appropriate ecological context. Their prey are there. There's, all three of those snakes occur. I'm not worried about competition. You got the Huachucas. All three of them are there. They're doing fine. So I kind of lean towards, I think it's a good idea. I think we need to do a lot more thinking about it. But
that's always the challenge, right? I mean, you don't know what you don't know. And so, we don't have a great track record of introducing, cane toads in Australia, things like that, where we're like, hey, this will solve the problem. And then it's like, oop, and nope.
Oops.
So,
exactly.
I'm sure there's plenty of things to consider, but that's a tall order to
it is. And I mean, it's not, we could bring a pathogen in that wipes out the twin spots on that mountain,
Right.
So obviously, you want to have due caution. But you also have to, as you said, you have to realize that, when I was a kid growing up, it was like, oh, if this species goes extinct, the whole ecosystem will collapse. And, what we've learned is that's just not true.
Right.
It's more like if we put this species in, the whole ecosystem will collapse, right? Mm-hmm. Crayfish in the streams of Arizona, bullfrog.
Right.
I mean, it's like it goes on and on.
Yeah. The opposite is more true than it's just so complex that it's very difficult to predict what the outcome will be. And that's, I guess that's why I ask, are there places that would support them that don't have either clobber eye or price eye or, things like that could be potentially impacted in a negative way? Or,
well, Mark Davis and Douglas, and I think I was on the paper too, did a paper, that modeled habitat for Willard Eye and called it a bellwether for change in the Sky Islands. And so one of the things that was found in that paper, based on a much smaller data set, and it's an older study now, the analytical techniques have changed quite a bit, but it found that the San Francisco mountains above Flagstaff were going to be optimal habitat in about 80 years. And so, which is like now that's about 70 years. But so, I think about that and I think, that's a climate model that looks at, aspect and, reflected light and, vegetative cover and all of these physical aspects of the environment. But it doesn't look at ecology. It doesn't, there's no Scalopus yarvi up there. I don't know if there's Scolopendra up there or not. But there's, how much are those snakes dialed into hunting for brush mice and cued in on, brush mouse scent and setting up a coil next to the little logs that those guys run on like squirrels.
Right.
So I think to ignore the ecological context would be a mistake.
Yeah.
Someplace might physically be ideal, but it might not be ecologically ideal.
Right. And also, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, these disappearances or extinction events are very common in our Earth's history. Like how many animals have lived on Earth and have gone out of existence, and I mean, obviously we all love these animals and don't want them to go extinct, but sometimes if it's just the environment's not going to support them anymore, what do you do? I guess, yes, you can say, hey, let's put them somewhere else. But at the same token, it's like, well, if they're disappearing there's probably a reason for it. And maybe they're on their way out anyway, regardless of what we do. And if there's a chance to do worse, by putting them somewhere else, that's a slippery slope, I guess.
I hear you.
Yeah.
And so just a couple thoughts on that. I mean, one thing I used to, tell my students is, from the point of view of science, right? Extinction events are nothing but fascinating, right? I mean, you remove having to live through one from the equation and just, terminal Cretaceous event, it's like, wow, angiosperms and mammals and like the changes and, it's fascinating, and it creates opportunities, into the future, and so, yeah, things go extinct, right? And that's part of the whole evolutionary process of life on Earth. But I think what's different this time is we're causing it.
Right.
We're causing it, and it's the rate at which we're causing it. I think, background levels of extinction, between extinction events during geologic periods are pretty low. They're background levels. And then you get these spikes, but they're due to cataclysmic things like, giant objects smashing into the earth.
Right.
And so, and so it's, I think there's the philosophical problem I have with, things go extinct is, A, it's not a background rate. B, it's at this accelerated rate. And C, I'm causing it. I'm causing it. And so should I try and do something about that? Right? Yeah.
No, I totally understand that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's a difficult thing to consider for sure. And I guess sometimes we get kind of in a gridlock with that, kind of thinking where, hey, we don't want to do anything that we can't predict the outcome to, but it's very difficult to predict outcomes. We've seen that time and time again. So it could be just fine. It could be catastrophic for something else, or it could be beneficial for everybody involved. Who can say, so.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's hard to say. And I guess, my point is I'm not advocating for it right now. I'm advocating for the conversation and people being open to the conversation about it. And, I've encountered folks that are just like, indignant that we're even talking about it, and it's like, come on, man, come on.
Right. I mean, there's always going to be somebody like that, that just absolutely under no circumstances should we ever even think about this. Yeah. That's a tricky situation for sure.
It's an impure thought. Wow. I mean, there's folks out there, Pleistocene rewilding, and that's and it's in the same, niche of discussion, right?
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. Yeah. My final question, and I suppose this applies to everyone, Justin and I specifically are certainly interested. So again, recognizing the limitation of pursuit, everyone has the ability to go try their hand in the Palencios and see if they can turn one up by, take a picture and walk away. My understanding is that you used to do regular surveys in the Animus, and that the scheduling around that has changed. And if that's true, how do we were just had a conversation, 2 weeks ago, right, Justin, with Dr. Zach Loafman at West Liberty. And, his message was basically, hey, you guys, should be expressing your interest to scientific professionals and essentially giving your credentials, volunteering your time, whatever that takes, whatever that looks like. How does anyone try and become involved to the extent that stuff's still going in the Animus at some point in time to help on a crew and maybe fulfill their dreams?
Your request is in. Back it up with an email. I'll add you to the list of dreamers. And, here's what I say. Every year around monsoon season, I become the least popular guy around because we can't go down there with 50 people, right? And we've gone down there for 30 years with, crews of 20 and 30 people for a week in early October, late September. And, there's just all this discussion about this, that we have internally. But there's a core crew of folks who have participated for most of that 30 years. And I feel obliged to give them first shot at going every year. Right. When we started with the Recovery Challenge Award, we brought in the Rattlesnake Conservancy, we brought in Zoo Partners. They had to have people on the ground too, and so there was these institutional obligations for participation. And So it gets tough. The last time what I did is I sent out an email at like 10 o'clock at night, and I said, here's the sign up list. It's a freaking, Excel spread, not an Excel spreadsheet, a Google sheet, first come, first serve. Oh, that pissed everybody off too. It was like, what? And it's like,
I didn't see the email until
it was 1 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast, man. And so, it's like, I can't win. And so, and everybody's like, well, we have to come. Those guys have to come. This is the right, and it's agencies and it's all this stuff. And so it's a really tough call to make because, you want your partners there. So they're vested in the project and, participating in conservation, and some of us are getting older. I'm not catching snakes like I did when I was 30. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm, there's a bunch of us. And so we just balance it as best we can. New folks come along and express interest and I add them to the list. And, sometimes a bunch of people have to bow out for personal reasons, weddings and whatever else. And so we end up with spots and you get in. So send me that email and you're on the list.
All right.
That's all I can promise is you're on the list.
We're within driving distance, so it should be.
All right. Yeah, and Animus, Animus decided to go back to, we had, amazing access. They've been very generous with us over the 30 years. There's some of the very few people that are allowed to repeatedly go there year after year. We went almost every year for 30 years, maybe about 5 years in there intermittently where we didn't, COVID, et cetera. Right. But I think about 2 or 3 years ago, they decided that they wanted to back, they deal with requests all the time, for access. And they've got to deal with people. And we've always tried to make that very easy for them. We go in as a group, we come out as a group. People aren't leaving gates open. We got rules about behavior and, treatment of the habitat and garbage and all that kind of stuff. So we've been very good stewards of that access. But I think they just got to a point where it was just too many people coming too often. And they said, in our easement, we're required to give, every 5-year access for monitoring. And so ask us in 27, you can come back in 28.
Oh, shoot. Yeah.
So we're looking forward to going back.
Okay.
And and it's not like the door is shut permanently or anything like that. So we're thankful for that.
Right.
And and the Palancios, you're right. People can go down there and look for snakes. I would advise folks that expressly going there to look for Obscurus in the eyes of the Fish and Wildlife Service is illegal, whether you see one or not. Now there's proving pursuit in a court, and are they going to cite you for looking because you got a snake sticking you in the Palancios? Probably not. But and the last of the only 2 prosecutions I know of for illegal collection of Obscurus, the last one was a bunch of guys from El Paso who went down there and had one in a bucket in their camp, I think at Miller Spring. And the feds came in posing as birders. Mm-hmm. Should have been the other way around, right? A clever guy was posing as a birder. But, and they showed him the snake, and boom, that was it. They were in court. And the judge threw the case out. She said, it's a rattlesnake. You guys can't be serious. God. I know. Yeah. I testified as an expert witness in that case. Right. I almost cried.
Yeah.
Because, I'm not like one of these, completely against collection. I mean, I don't have captive animals at home and it just doesn't do it for me. And I understand it does for other people. And I'm all for hunting licenses and bag limits and people can take animals home and have pets. That's how I got into herpetology. Right. Mm-hmm. But man, there is one place that if there is a population of snakes that can't take it, it's the Palancios. Right. The Palancios cannot take it. I mean, I'm all, go down there and take a picture and leave. I have no problem personally with that. The feds will. Right. I don't have a problem with that. But you take an animal out of there and you're just the most selfish person in the world. Right. Because that is a place where one animal could make a difference.
Right. And what do you do with it? I mean, what a joke. Like, why would you even think about that?
And my goodness,
I would think that it's probably... Yeah, I would think it's probably less likely just in the context of I mean, shoot, if someone's going to do that, they're already willing to break the law. You might as well go to the San Luis and have an easier time of finding a snake. And then, okay, you've added a violation of crossing an international border, but like, that's probably the sphere where you're talking about. I mean, I would have to imagine the people looking at the Palencios, for the most part, notable exception that you highlight there, are people who genuinely just, maybe they're just weirdos like us who have our own weird rules about life lists and things,
Yep.
Leave the Palencios alone.
Leave the snakes alone.
Right.
Snakes alone. I promise you a confession. You brought up life lists again, and so you haven't gotten an obscurus yet, but just think about how much more embarrassing it would be if you'd never found a willardi in your own state.
Right.
That's me.
Yeah. No.
I've been on collecting, on herping trips where, not collecting, but herping trips where other people have found them, but I haven't found one. And I don't know what it is. I haven't gone that much, but I've gone enough, and I just feel cursed at this point. But I think I'm in pretty good company. Howard Gloyd never found one, so.
Well, I've found 2 myself, so not
there
to
you
brag.
Go.
Yep, and I'm right there with you, Andrew. So, I don't know. I've seen 3 or 4, but Justin's found a couple of them, and so
you just get lucky or unlucky, right.
Our little rules.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I mean, the common goal, if you're with friends.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the way that I
kind of count it to some extent.
If we're a common pursuit, then it counts for me. That's where I'm at personally.
Yeah. We were in Western Pennsylvania looking for Eastern Massasaugas, and there was a school group that was there, a university group, and the ranger was kind of telling them, okay, this is what we're gonna do, and I was kind of lingering by. He said we could join the group if we wanted to, and I just thought he was gonna walk along the trails, and all of a sudden he said, okay, everybody spread out, and we're gonna start walking through this grass, and we'll see if we can find them that way. And I'm like, oh, hey, can I join in? And I got lucky again and found an Eastern Massasauga. So
awesome.
The class might have been a little bugged that this weird old guy comes and steals their thunder, But,
somehow Justin gets lucky a lot, which is really helpful in this common common pursuit.
There's something to that, man. Some people you just want to rub their head and get some of their mojo.
Well,
it's funny, these life lists, things. It's like you get into herpetology professionally and everything, and that your own personal life list is still like this really important thing to you, right? It's kind of silly, but it's true.
Right. Well, and it is a little bit selfish to some extent, like a lot of people have kind of said, hey, why not do something more productive, like a research project or something like that. And I envision like maybe my retirement is spent, chasing Great Basin rattlesnakes around my neighborhood or something, like tracking individuals, seeing if I can find anything cool out about them or something. But, I do love citizen science. And I think in some ways, if we're properly, sharing those observations, it may help science in the, large scale type thing, some of these databases and things. So,
look at Snakes of Arizona and the number of purse comms in there on prey records and, all of the stuff in there, in the speckled rattlesnake account, in terms of prey items and reproduction. And then in willardi, it's like, there's a lot of information that citizen science provides that's super valuable. And that, that's the other thing I love about this Recovery Challenge Award, that it sort of changed the face of our work with willardi, because for a long time it was a pretty cloistered group of folks that were going into the Animus on a regular basis. And we all knew each other, and, there were no outsiders, or maybe one or two every once in a while. And then with the Recovery Challenge Award, because we had less restrictions, I think, on group size in part. And we're going to the San Luis. It's just like the diversity of folks involved just went through the roof. We've got people that are involved in husbandry at these animal care, places, zoos. And we've got TRC involved, and we've got folks that are just enthusiasts that found, Obscurus in the Palencios and took photos and contacted agencies to say, what do you want to do? People that care. And it's this amazing, just group of individuals, which was nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that may negatively impact that if it's illegal to even look for, Obscurus or go to, if they suspect you're in the area looking for them. I mean, I guess if they're not going to prosecute somebody with one in a bucket, maybe you'd be okay. Right. But yeah. But still, the fact that you can't even really technically go look for them is a little contraindicative for, if you want to help out, hey, we found one, here's where it was, provide the information to you or, somebody that's doing research, that kind of thing could be helpful. And if you don't get that opportunity,
Yeah. It's the flip side. I think that from an agency perspective, and I can't speak for them, it's just this fear of, intent, everybody that you encounter down there is just wanting to take a picture, right? But is that true?
That's the hard thing. Is like how can you? How do you determine? I guess
how do you evaluate that?
You pretend you're a birder, and you. Right. Well, shoot. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. We really appreciate you coming on and let us grill you a little bit. Have you reached the point of medium rare? Or,
Yeah, I don't feel very medium rare, but rare.
Okay. We'll have to bring you on again, grill you a little more. But.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
You guys are most welcome. Yeah. Thanks for giving Obscurus some time. And they certainly, over the years, they've been obscure with regard to, conservation focus. They haven't gotten much attention in the media and everything. And so we're also happy about that. That's also one of our goals, is to kind of heighten awareness about their plight.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah, how can people follow your research or kind of?
I just disengaged from social media. So, I think the zoos, we're going to be we put out a couple videos. TRC put out a really nice video on the Recovery Challenge Award work that we're doing. And, Arizona Game and Fish too, so they could watch those.
Is that the Project Obscurus video?
Yeah. Okay. And then, I like that one. I often show that when I give talks. So
cool.
It gives people a much better feel that have never been there. They see the snakes in the habitat. They see snakes crawling and doing snake stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so, and they see the people involved. And so it's better than me gabbing and showing graphs, right?
That's interesting too. Right? Yeah. And did enjoy your talk to the Tucson Herpetological Society too.
Okay.
Very interesting and cool research. I mean, just any project that spans, such a period of time is just, you can find out such amazing information from those projects. So I'm definitely indebted to you and your time that you've spent, doing your research, because that's how we learn cool things about the animals we love and are excited for. So,
well, there's we've got, like I said earlier, I'm 60 and we've been there over 30 years. So over half my life has been spent studying snakes and being in these places. And, I know I speak for everybody in our group, and it is a group of people that are doing this, not just me. There's a bond to not just the snake, but to the places and to the people that you've shared experiences there with. It's just indescribable.
Yeah.
It's indescribable.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good sentiment to end on, I think. Just what a great thought. But all right, well, we appreciate you and appreciate Eric and Owen for housing our podcast, and thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week for Reptile Fight Club.